The arena trembled like a living beast. 50,000 voices collided into one thunderous roar, rattling the steel beams overhead and shaking the ground beneath every pair of feet. It wasn't just sound. It was a force of nature, a tidal wave that surged against the walls, ricocheted into the rafters, and spilled into the night sky beyond. The stadium pulsed with a rhythm of its own. Chants, screams, the rhythmic clap of hands, and the stomping of shoes beating a war drum into the concrete floor. Michael, Michael, Michael. The chant rose and fell in waves, sometimes frantic, sometimes drawn out and trembling with anticipation. The sound was deafening, but beneath it lay something else, an electricity, a collective hunger. 50,000 people had come for one man, and now every second of waiting pressed down on them like a tightening vice. Then the lights died. Darkness swallowed the stadium in an instant, and the crowd erupted into a frenzy of screams. Neon wristbands and camera flashes lit the void like fireflies in a storm. The stage remained cloaked in black, a massive shadow at the center of the chaos. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the audience itself, a living organism desperate to release its anticipation. And then it came, the spotlight. A single white beam cut through the smoke, slicing the darkness like a blade. At its center stood Michael Jackson. He hadn't moved yet. He didn't need to. His silhouette alone sent shockwaves through the arena. The fedora tilted low over his face, its brim catching the faintest edge of the light. His sequined jacket shimmered like liquid silver, scattering starlight into the haze. One hand rested at his side, gloved in white that glowed brighter than the beam itself. The other hovered near his chest, a gesture frozen in time. The screams reached a pitch so high it bordered on hysteria. Entire rows of fans clutched at each other, some sobbing already, some gasping as if they'd forgotten how to breathe. The cameras zoomed in, blasting his image onto towering screens that framed the stage. Even those in the very last row could see the way his shoulders lifted with each deliberate breath. He tilted his head, just slightly. The gesture was microscopic, a flicker of movement, and the stadium lost its mind. The sound swelled, shaking the air so violently that for a moment, the music technicians worried the very speakers might rupture. But Michael didn't flinch. He stood as still as marble, a statue draped in sequins and shadow, feeding on the chaos like it was oxygen. The band waited, poised in silence behind him. Fingers rested on keys, drumsticks hovered in the air, guitars hung at the ready. One signal from him, one twitch of his hand, and they would unleash a wall of sound powerful enough to flatten the arena. But still he waited, because Michael Jackson understood something most performers never did. Anticipation was the most dangerous weapon in the world. A minute passed, maybe less, maybe more. Time was elastic here, stretching and snapping under the weight of expectation. The audience couldn't take it anymore. They screamed, begged, wept for him to move, to sing, to do something. And then, a sound cut through the madness. Not the thunder of drums, not the crack of guitar, not the familiar opening beat of a hit that would send the arena into chaos. No, it was a voice. High, pure, small, a child's voice. Michael. The word ripped through the noise like a bell ringing in the fog. It was impossible, utterly impossible, that he could have heard it above the storm. And yet, somehow it carried. Michael froze. The crowd screamed, faltered, confused, as if thousands of people had all misstepped at once. He had been poised a signal, to ignite the show into fire and sound, but instead his entire body stiffened. The white glove that had hovered casually by his side curled slightly inward. His head tilted, not in performance now, but in shock. Again, the voice rang out, clearer this time. Michael. The sound was fragile, yet it sliced the air clean in two. Tens of thousands of heads turned instinctively, scanning the endless ocean of faces, trying to locate the impossible source. On stage, Michael's breath caught. He lifted his head, his eyes hidden in shadow, but the trembling line of his jaw was visible even to the back rows. The band hesitated, unsure whether to continue or wait. Stagehands glanced nervously at one another, but nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The energy inside the stadium shifted. What had been a deafening wall of sound collapsed into a tense, ringing silence. 50,000 people, every scream, every chant, every heartbeat, fell into waiting. Michael's chest rose once, sharply. Then again, slower this time, unsteady. His hand lifted toward the brim of his hat, but he didn't tip it. He simply gripped the edge, knuckles white beneath the spotlight, as though the fedora were the only thing tethering him to the stage. That single child's voice had cut through the chaos. And Michael Jackson, the king of pop, the man who had commanded stages on every continent, who had stared down oceans of humanity and bent them to his will, suddenly looked very small, very human. For the first time that night, the performance wasn't scripted. It wasn't choreographed, rehearsed, or planned. Something had happened that nobody, not the band, not the crew, not even Michael himself, could have predicted, and the entire world seemed to hang in the balance, waiting for what he would do next. If you're enjoying the story, please subscribe to support the channel. For a moment, the stadium forgot it was a concert. The massive steel girders that held the roof, the giant LED screens, the deafening speaker towers, it all melted away, replaced by a silence so fragile it felt like glass. 50,000 people leaned forward at once, holding their breath as though any sound might shatter the moment. Michael Jackson stood at the center of it all, unmoving. The spotlight carved him out of the dark, like a statue made of flesh and sequins. His white glove glimmered faintly, trembling against the side of his leg. The brim of his fedora cast his eyes in shadow, but the tilt of his head told the story. He was listening. Somewhere in the sea of faces, a child had dared to shout his name. The crowd, a living beast just minutes ago, now shifted uneasily. Whispers replaced screams. A murmur rolled across the stands as people tried to process what they'd just heard. Security guards squinted into the pit, scanning the rows. Camera operators glanced at their directors for orders. Band members clutched their instruments, uncertain if they should play or wait. But Michael remained frozen. His chest rose sharply, then fell. Again, slower. His breathing was ragged, uneven. He brought one hand up to his face, fingertips grazing his cheek as though checking for proof of the tear that had begun to fall. He lowered his hand quickly, but not before the camera caught it and magnified it onto the towering screens above the stage. Gasps rippled across the arena. The king of pop crying? No one had expected vulnerability here. They had come for spectacle, pyrotechnics, choreography, a voice that could bend time itself. They had come for perfection, the kind of flawless performance that defined Michael Jackson. But now before them stood a man undone by a child's voice. The silence deepened. It wasn't empty. No, it pulsed with tension. The audience could hear small things they'd never noticed at a concert. The shuffle of shoes against the stage floor, the faint buzz of an amplifier idling, the distant echo of a cough in the upper rows. Each sound carried in the stillness, amplified by the sheer absence of noise. Michael's hand gripped the microphone, but he didn't raise it. He wasn't ready. His lips parted slightly, closed again. His jaw clenched, the muscles twitching under the glow of the spotlight. Another heartbeat passed. Then, Michael. The child's voice rang out again, louder this time, braver. And the silence broke, not into chaos, but into awe. Thousands of heads turned in unison, like a field of sunflowers chasing the same sliver of light. People craned their necks, searching desperately for the small voice that had shaken the king. Michael's body moved at last. Slowly, almost painfully, he lifted his head. The fedora tilted back, revealing his eyes to the world. And they weren't the sharp, commanding eyes of a performer who had conquered stages across the globe. They were wet, raw, trembling with something far deeper than surprise. Recognition. He scanned the crowd, squinting as though the lights themselves blurred his vision. The camera operators, sensing the gravity of the moment, began panning across the audience, desperate to find the source of the cry. The giant screens above flickered with faces, teenagers sobbing into their hands, grown men shouting encouragement, mothers clutching children against their shoulders. Every face became part of the search. But Michael wasn't looking at the screens. He was looking with his own eyes, slowly, methodically, row by row, seat by seat. The audience held perfectly still, as if afraid to interrupt. This wasn't just a performer scanning his fans. This was a man searching for something. Someone that had pierced through the storm. Seconds stretched like hours. The band stood in suspense, hands frozen on their instruments. Dancers in the wings fidgeted nervously, unsure whether to hold their marks or step back. Crew members whispered frantically into headsets, but no one dared speak above a whisper. Finally, Michael's body shifted. His gaze stopped. Somewhere in the pit, close to the front, but not in the very first row. He saw them, a child, small, fragile, perched on their parents' shoulders, arms stretched as high as it could reach. The light from the stage caught the child's face, eyes wide, mouth trembling with determination. Michael blinked hard. His lips parted, forming a silent word no microphone caught. The cameras found a child a heartbeat later, zooming in until their image filled the massive screens. Gasps erupted across the stadium, followed by applause that quickly hushed itself, unwilling to break the spell. There they were, the voice, the interruption, the miracle. The child cupped their hands around their mouth, shouting once more, their voice cracking with both excitement and fear. "I love you, Michael." The sound ricocheted off the steel beams and washed across the audience like a wave. This time, everyone heard it, and Michael broke. His hand lifted the fedora from his head and pressed it against his chest. His eyes squeezed shut as a sob escaped him. Not loud, not theatrical, but raw, caught by the microphone though he hadn't meant it. The sound filled the arena, echoing against the silence in a way that turned thousands of stomachs inside out. The audience erupted, but not into screams this time, into applause. Thunderous, unanimous applause that rolled through the arena like a storm breaking. People wept openly, clutching strangers beside them, chanting his name again, softer now, filled with reverence instead of frenzy. "Michael, Michael, Michael." He opened his eyes, tears streaking his face, and he smiled. Not the rehearsed smile, not the performer's grin. This smile was fragile, trembling, and soaked in gratitude. A smile that said everything words could not. The child's face glowed on the screens above, and the world saw them grin through their own tears, nodding furiously as if to say, "I meant it, every word." Michael pressed his hand to his heart. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered to his knees at the edge of the stage. The crowd gasped again, realizing they weren't watching a show anymore. They were watching a man connect, unguarded, unchoreographed, to one small voice in a sea of thousands. And for the first time that night, Michael spoke into the microphone. His voice cracked, almost breaking. "I hear you." The stadium erupted, not with frenzy but with something deeper. Gratitude, relief, love, and the silence that had hung like glass shattered, not into chaos, but into communion. The arena had transformed into something no one could have predicted. Moments earlier, it had been a furnace of noise, a shrine to spectacle where every light, every beat, every movement was designed to overwhelm the senses. But now it was stripped bare. No choreography, no music, just one man and one child's voice suspended in a silence so profound that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Michael remained kneeling at the edge of the stage, hat pressed to his chest, staring into the crowd. His eyes, still wet with tears, locked onto the child perched above the sea of bodies. The giant screens magnified the scene. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, cheeks flushed red, eyes shimmering with a mix of terror and unshakable devotion. A small hand clung tightly to the shoulder of the adult holding him up, but the other hand stretched outward, reaching, trembling, desperate. Michael's lips moved again, silent to the crowd but visible on the screens. "Thank you." The audience gasped, then broke into another round of applause, less frenzied, more reverent, like they were clapping for something sacred. People wept openly, mascara running, shoulders shaking. Others gripped strangers' hands, needing someone, anyone, to share the weight of what was happening. The cameras zoomed in closer, framing the child in light. The director in the broadcast booth whispered hoarsely into the headset, "Stay on them. Don't you dare cut away." The band remained motionless, instruments hanging like relics of another world. This wasn't their moment. Even they knew it. Michael wiped his cheek with the back of his glove, his chest rising and falling in uneven waves. He lifted the microphone with a trembling hand, But for long seconds, no words came. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of its usual velvet sheen. "What's your name?" The words echoed through the speakers, soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the arena. The child blinked, startled. The mic wasn't near them. Their voice wouldn't reach the sound system. But they cupped their hands around their mouth and shouted with all their strength. "My name is Daniel." The crowd erupted. The name reverberated through the stadium, repeated by fans like an echo. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. Thousands of voices chanting a child's name alongside Michael's, entwining them together forever. Michael pressed his free hand against his chest again, bowing his head deeply as though honoring royalty. The gesture silenced the chanting almost instantly. The stadium obeyed his smallest movements now, not as an audience, but as witnesses. He raised his head, eyes locking with the child once more. His voice cracked as he whispered into the microphone, "Daniel, I hear you." The words weren't shouted, but they didn't need to be. They rolled across the arena with the weight of confession. The child shouted again, louder this time, their voice cracking, "I love you, Michael." Michael froze. His lips trembled. Then he smiled. Not the calculated smile that had charmed millions, but a smile drenched in disbelief, gratitude, and a vulnerability that no stage had ever seen from him before. The audience roared, not the shrill, chaotic screams of fandom, but a wave of sound that felt like relief, like release, like gratitude for witnessing something they knew they'd never see again. People embraced, kissed, collapsed into tears. The sound was joy and heartbreak, and awe all woven together. Michael stood slowly, his knees shaky, his shoulders rising and falling as if the weight of the entire arena pressed against him. He walked toward the edge of the stage, closer, closer still, until he was standing right above where the child sat on their parents' shoulders. The spotlight followed him, bathing the child in the same white light, tying their fates together. He knelt again, extending his gloved hand outward, not quite touching but hovering inches above the sea of security guards and outstretched arms. The child reached up, fingers trembling, stretching as far as they could. The distance was too great, but in that instant, no one doubted the connection was real. Michael lowered the mic, his voice breaking as he whispered, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but directly to Daniel. "You are not alone." The words carried no melody, no rhythm, but they pierced like a song. The arena erupted again, thousands screaming the phrase back at him in unison. "You are not alone." Michael staggered slightly, overwhelmed, then laughed through his tears. A soft, shaking laugh, the kind that comes when grief collides with joy. He pressed both hands together in a gesture of prayer and bowed deeply toward Daniel. The child's face filled the screens once more, tears streaming freely now, lips mouthing the words, "Thank you." The audience dissolved into chaos, not disorder, but devotion. People shouted Daniel's name, shouted Michael's name, shouted love into the air until it became a physical force. The air buzzed, the floor trembled, and yet somehow, despite all the noise, Michael and the child seemed suspended in a private world, invisible threads tethering them together. He turned back toward the microphone, finally lifting it to his lips. His voice wavered, soft and breaking, but it carried. This is why I do it." The words rang out across the arena, and the crowd exploded once more. Some screamed, some prayed, some simply stood in stunned silence, unable to process the weight of what they were living through. The bandleader raised his eyebrows, silently asking if they should resume, if they should attempt to salvage the show. Michael didn't look back. He held up a single trembling hand, palm out. "Not yet." This wasn't part of the show. This was the show. Michael turned toward the crowd again, his eyes lingering on Daniel's face, his expression soft but resolute. And for the first time that night, he began to sing. No music, no instruments, just his voice. "You are not alone. I am here with you." The stadium went silent. 50,000 people leaned into the sound, his naked voice cutting through the stillness like a prayer. It was imperfect, cracking, trembling, soaked with emotion, but that imperfection was what made it beautiful. Daniel sobbed openly. Their tiny hands pressed to their face, and the cameras caught every second. The audience followed suit, thousands breaking down, their cries mixing with Michael's voice until the song became something larger than music. The king of pop had been humbled by a child, and in doing so, he had transformed a concert into communion. And as the final notes of his unaccompanied verse drifted into the rafters, the audience knew they had just witnessed history. The arena was no longer an arena. It had become a cathedral, a sanctuary where music and silence carried equal weight. Michael stood at its center, hands trembling, chest heaving, staring into the crowd as if he had just been reborn. The child's voice, Daniel's voice, still echoed inside him, reverberating louder than any drumbeat or guitar riff could. The band waited in stunned silence, their instruments useless. Dancers lingered in the wings, unsure whether they were still part of the story. Even the stagehands and security guards seemed frozen in place, captivated by the invisible thread that bound Michael and the child together. Michael brought the microphone to his lips again, his voice fragile, but steady enough to carry. "Sing with me." The crowd roared in response, but he held up his hand, palm outward, asking for quiet. The stadium obeyed. It was startling. 50,000 people, silenced by the smallest flick of his fingers. He pointed toward the child, his voice cracking as he sang once more. "You are not alone." The words were soft, unadorned, but they carried to the sound system like a prayer. He gestured toward the audience, beckoning them in. The crowd responded tentatively at first, a scattered murmur of voices rising from the pit, the mid-level seats, the rafters. But within seconds it swelled into something vast, a choir of 50,000 rising in unison, their voices overlapping, imperfect but impossibly powerful. "I am here with you." The arena shook, not with drums or bass, but with human sound. Strangers clutched hands. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders. Couples wrapped arms around each other. Entire rows swayed together as if pulled by invisible strings. Michael lowered the mic and let them sing. His eyes closed, his hands trembling at his sides. He simply listened. For once, he wasn't the performer. He was the audience, humbled before the sheer force of love pouring back at him. Daniel's small voice, carried by the microphones mounted near the pit, rose faintly above the mass of sound. It was cracked, off-key, but raw with sincerity. Michael's eyes snapped open, and he smiled through tears so heavy they blurred his vision. He raised the mic again, his voice shaking but resolute. "You're always in my heart." The crowd finished the line without prompting, their voices crashing like waves against his. He laughed softly, broken, beautiful laughter, and stepped back on the mic, clutching it against his chest. The song was theirs now, and he gave it to them without hesitation. The cameras captured everything. Daniel on the shoulders of his guardian, tears streaking down his cheeks as he sang with all his strength. Rows of fans in hysterics, mascara smeared, hands raised high like worshippers in a revival. Security guards abandoning their stern expressions, some of them singing too. Even the band members, stunned at first, now swaying, joining the chorus with their instruments muted. It was no longer a Michael Jackson concert. It was communion. Michael dropped to his knees again, bowing his head as the audience's song filled the arena. Then, slowly, he turned his mic outward, holding it toward the crowd, as if it were an offering. 50,000 voices poured through it, blasting from the speakers like a flood. The sound was deafening, but it wasn't chaos. It was harmony. Imperfect, ragged, human harmony. Michael rose to his feet, holding the mic high above his head, his face tilted toward the rafters. His lips moved silently. "Thank you. Thank you." Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he spun on his heel, gesturing sharply to the band. They jolted to life, instruments blazing to catch up with the moment. The drummer struck a steady beat. The guitarist strummed power chords, and the keyboardist added a soaring line above it all. But even now, the music didn't overpower the audience. It supported them. The band became accompaniment to 50,000 voices, not the other way around. Michael sang again, louder this time, his voice finally unleashing its full power. "You are not alone." The stadium roared the response back at him. "I am here with you." He dropped to one knee, pointing to a section of the audience high in the rafters. "You're always in my heart." The rafters screamed it back, nearly drowning him out. He pointed to the floor section next. "You're always in my heart." They bellowed the line with such force it rattled the stage monitors. Michael spun, pointing toward the opposite side of the arena. "You are not alone." 50,000 people sang in sections now, call and response, like a gospel choir split across an entire stadium. Michael was a conductor, the preacher, the vessel, but the music belonged to them all. Daniel's face filled the big screens once more. The child's mouth was wide open, shouting every word, his cheeks stained with tears but glowing with joy. The audience saw him and erupted louder, as if 50,000 people wanted to lift him higher with their voices. Michael staggered backward, overwhelmed, pressing his free hand to his face. His voice cracked as he shouted into the mic. "Do you feel it?" The stadium thundered back. "Yes." "Do you believe it?" Another roar shook the air. "Yes." "Then sing it with me, louder." And they did, louder than before, louder than the speakers could contain, louder than the rafters could hold. It was no longer a performance. It was an earthquake, a tidal wave of human sound, tearing through every corner of the stadium and spilling out into the night. Michael collapsed to his knees, overcome. His glove clutched the mic against his lips as he whispered the final refrain, tears soaking his cheeks. "You're not alone." The crowd finished it. "I am here with you." Silence followed, but not empty silence. Sacred silence, the kind that follows prayer. Michael sat motionless, head bowed, hands trembling. For once, he didn't know how to continue. There was no choreography for this, no script, no plan. So he did the only thing he could. He placed his fedora on the stage floor in front of him, bowing deeply toward the child who had started it all. The crowd erupted into sobs and applause so thunderous it shook the foundations of the building. And in that moment, 50,000 people understood they weren't just witnessing a concert. They were part of something that would be told for decades to come. The final notes hung in the air like smoke, dissolving slowly into silence. Not the restless silence of anticipation, not the awkward hush of something gone wrong, but a sacred, trembling quiet. 50,000 people sat in it together, their breaths synchronized, their hearts pounding with the weight of what they had just lived through. Michael Jackson remained on his knees at the center of the stage, his fedora lying before him like an offering, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He looked smaller than he ever had under the blinding spotlight. The king of pop, reduced, stripped bare, undone by the voice of a single child. When he finally lifted his face, streaked with tears, the crowd gasped as one. His smile was fragile, unguarded, but radiant. He pressed a microphone to his lips, his voice trembling but strong enough to carry. "That is why I sing." The words broke the silence like a spark. The arena erupted, not in the usual shrieking frenzy of fandom, but in a roar of gratitude, a tidal wave of applause and tears and cries of devotion. It wasn't noise anymore. It was communion, 1,000 lifetimes of love compressed into one impossible moment. Michael closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. His glove clutched the microphone like a lifeline. He whispered again, softer this time, as if speaking to himself. "For you." The words echoed through the stadium, magnified by the speakers, carved into memory by the cameras. "For you." The audience responded with sobs, cheers, and chanted his name, rolling like thunder across the vast space. "Michael, Michael, Michael." He stood slowly, unsteady at first, then tall, his body illuminated by the spotlight, until he seemed less like a man and more like a figure carved out of light itself. He reached down, picked up his fedora, and held it to his chest. And then he did something no one expected. He placed the hat on the very edge of the stage and stepped back, leaving it there. A token, a relic, a gift of the moment, untouchable by anyone who might try to claim it. The crowd screamed, realizing they were witnessing something he had never done before. The hat, the fedora, the crown of his silhouette, left behind as if to say, "This moment is greater than me." Michael turned back to the audience, his hand lifting to quiet them once more. And, unbelievably, they obeyed. The silence fell again, deafening in its depth. He looked directly into the cameras now, eyes swollen, face streaked with tears, and spoke not just to people in the stadium, but to the millions who would one day watch this footage and feel the echo of the night. Don't ever forget, love is stronger than fear. And one voice can change everything. He pointed directly toward Daniel, still perched on his guardian's shoulders. The camera zoomed in, filling the giant screens with the child's tear-streaked face. The stadium erupted again, chanting the boy's name in waves that rivaled the chants of Michael earlier. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. The boy covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed, but Michael smiled through his tears, nodding firmly as if to say, "Yes, you deserve this." The band, sensing the end, began to play softly. Not a full song, just a gentle progression, a lullaby to close the night. Michael didn't move into choreography. He didn't moonwalk, didn't spin, didn't strike a pose. Instead, he simply raised his arms outward, opening himself to the audience as if embracing them all at once. The roar of the crowd built again, a storm of voices colliding into one uncontainable sound. The walls shook, the rafters trembled, and the very air seemed to crackle with electricity. Michael lowered his arms, pressed both hands to his heart, and whispered into the microphone one final time, "I love you." The lights cut instantly, plunging the arena into darkness. For a moment, the audience thought it was over. But then, the giant screens flickered back to life, not with cameras, but with words written in glowing white letters across the black. "You are not alone." The stadium erupted in a final, earth-shattering cheer that rolled like thunder across the city outside, spilling into the night sky. Backstage, crew members wept. The band set their instruments down in silence. Security guards wiped their eyes, pretending it was sweat. Even the hardened technicians in the control booth sat frozen, whispering to one another, "We'll never see anything like this again." And they were right, because what had unfolded wasn't just a concert. It wasn't even just a performance. It was something greater, an unrepeatable collision of love, vulnerability, and humanity that no script, no choreography, no technology could ever create again. For years afterward, people would argue about the details. Some swore Michael had stopped singing entirely and let the crowd carry him. Others remembered his whisper, his laugh, his tears. Everyone claimed they had been the first to hear Daniel's voice. Bootleg recordings would surface, shaky and distorted. But no audio file could capture the weight of the silence that night, or the sound of 50,000 voices becoming one. Critics would write that Michael had reinvented what a concert could be. Fans would tell their children and grandchildren that they had been there the night the king of pop was humbled by a child. And Daniel, just a boy, just a voice, would never again live a life untouched by that moment. But none of that mattered in the arena on that night. What mattered was the feeling. The fragile, unshakable truth that even the brightest star in the world could be brought to tears by the simplest thing, a child's voice calling his name. Michael left the stage quietly. No fireworks, no encore, just a man walking into the shadows, his fedora still sitting at the edge of the stage, glowing faintly in the spotlight that refused to dim. The audience remained standing long after he was gone, chanting his name, chanting Daniel's, refusing to leave because leaving meant admitting it was over. Some stayed until the lights came up. Others lingered outside the arena, singing softly into the night air, unwilling to let go. And for everyone who had been there, it was clear this wasn't just a show they had seen. It was a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The night a child shouted his name. The night Michael Jackson froze, smiled through tears, and turned a concert into legend. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.